joining us on the Western Hotline is Steve Aschburner, senior writer, NBA.com. Whenever we decide to dip our toes in some NBA waters, we reach out to Steve often. He's gracious enough to join us once again. Steve, good morning.
Yeah, good morning, gentlemen. Thanks for having me on.
So, New York, huh? I mean, it's been a long time for anybody to go back there this late in the postseason.
Yeah, that's true. And you can see how giddy their fans are about this opportunity. I think it's I think it's a nice matchup, particularly for the Knicks, because they were so banged up when they played Indiana and lost to them in 7 games last spring. It really wasn't reflective, I think, of the level of the teams. So now New York, much healthier. Indiana has been tremendous to this point, and I think this one is going to be, really a difficult and a long series.
Getting back to that in a minute, Steve, I want your thought on, sometimes people like to say things like the league likes teams to be in it late or that it's good for the league. And it feels like there was a 10, 15-year conversation about the Knicks and how it would be important and better for the NBA overall if the Knicks were competitive and good. And we've kind of made it to that point, right? That they're not exactly newly competitive. They've been pretty good for a couple of years. But to get this far, are you someone that subscribes to that this is just kind of good for the game or it feels good for the NBA?
You know what? I would give that a little bit of legitimacy. I think it's too easy to overstate that. I mean, the fact that the Knicks have not been involved in things, hasn't stopped a lot of, attention from being focused on the league, a lot of intriguing matchups, and plenty of people across the country being interested in postseason series and ultimately NBA Finals. I suppose just by sheer market size, there's something to that. You get more people tuning in. I've never fully understood the need. Now I get it from the broadcast partners. They want their commercials to have the most possible eyeballs to charge the highest rates. Beyond that, though, the idea that if I'm enjoying the NBA Finals, I need to know that a bunch of people in New York are also watching it. I don't get that at all. I mean, I don't care if the guy next door is watching it. It's enough for me, and I'm glad it's on. And I don't think there's been any blinking over the idea that we're going to continue to televise these things. So I don't get that worked up over that. To see big rating numbers, yeah, people are doing what I'm doing. Let's have a little more personal security than that.
Yeah, Steve, interestingly enough, like this playoff for the NBA is going to feature 3 teams who have never won a championship. The Knicks haven't won one since 1973. And, you went into this playoffs. I know I did as a Knicks fan, Steve. Like, my Knicks buddies in group chats, like, we got to the Boston series, and it was like, well, guys, like, maybe they'll win a game. And then they won game 1. And then I was like, well, we'll always have game 1. And then they won game 2, and they ended up winning that series. And I'm just wondering, going into these playoffs, it was kind of, I don't know, maybe a foregone conclusion that it would be Cleveland-Boston in the finals. Injuries kind of dictated otherwise. What are your thoughts about this state of maybe the league in this Final Four grouping where you're kind of getting new blood? I know Minnesota was there in the Western Conference Finals last year, so was Indiana, but these are kind of newer teams to the, I guess, general spotlight of the Final Four.
Well, coming into this season, you'd had 6 different champions in 6 years. There had not been a repeat champion. There hadn't been anybody who even did it, 2 or 3 years apart, starting with, I believe, Toronto in 2019. So, in a way, it's sort of like you build a machine to produce a widget, and then it starts producing that widget, time after time after time. That's kind of what the NBA salary cap system is. It's designed for parity. And so we're seeing parity. It's much more difficult to build super teams. Its player movement is more difficult, certainly of star players, based on the contracts and the impact in terms of luxury tax hit to payrolls. And so everything that the league has done has been pointed toward having as many cities, markets with competitive teams as possible. And now we're seeing the output of that. So this is really not a surprise. This is sort of what's intended. Now, I thought we were going to have a repeat champion this year. I thought the Boston Celtics were the best team in the NBA. However, the regular season played out. I mean, Oklahoma City won a few more games, but I thought that the Celtics had the deepest roster. They had the most talent. They were able to go through the regular season sort of, with one arm tied behind their backs. It's like, well, we're not going to play Holiday and Porzingis, but we got plenty without with the other guys. Or we're going to sit out, Brown and Derek White. Or they could spot guys in and out, and it really wasn't hurting them. But obviously they had struggles, and the Knicks series was, eye popping to me. The way they blew those 20-point leads against New York, and then of course the Tatum thing just sort of sealed their fate. But no, I think the league, for the most part, I think they like having the wealth sort of spread around. And the downside, of course, is you don't have dynasties. But when there were dynasties, you had a lot of excited fans in Boston and L.A., Chicago for a stretch. But, the rest of the league sort of had to just sort of sit around, twiddling their thumbs. So I happen to like this better.
I also want to ask you about Tibbs, Tom Thibodeau, the Knicks coach, especially this year, Steve.
Yep.
Got a lot of, criticism for playing his starters as long as he has all year. I mean, they have, I think, 4 of their starters are top 10 in the league in minutes played and minutes per game. You have the minutes champion in Josh Hart, who basically doesn't come off the court same. I guess I look at who is left. Last year, it was the criticism that by playing his starters too long, they were banged up by the time it mattered in the playoffs. This year, very different story, and the other teams were kind of seeing, and I saw a great article and a great piece of maybe Tibbs is onto something. What are your thoughts about, teams that do a lot of sitting their starters and a lot of rest for their star players, where the Knicks, they run their starting 5 pretty much more than any team in the NBA?
Well, full disclosure here. I mean, I'm firmly in Tom Thibodeau's camp on this. I mean, I've known Tom since he first got a toehold in this league with the Minnesota Timberwolves as an assistant coach in 1989. And I've talked and dealt with other coaches in the meantime, obviously with Tom as well. I really believe the whole minutes thing is overstated. I think that the load management trend got out of control. And I don't know that it necessarily served any good end for the NBA or its players. I think that trying to anticipate fatigue injuries is about as far from an exact science as you can possibly get. What do we see mostly these days? We see these soft tissue, non-contact injuries where an Achilles snaps. Anybody ever say that an Achilles with Damian Lillard or Jason Tatum is related to cumulative minutes over a 6-month period? I don't buy that. I think that wise coaches for decades have regulated, modulated guys' playing time, their minutes, their wear and tear by what they do in between games. I know plenty of veteran coaches who would have essentially walkthroughs on practice days as the season went on because they're not going to burn guys out on a practice court. And so, it's that time in between. You've got, especially in the playoffs, at best you play one game every 48 hours. So what do you do for those other 45 hours in between the games? That to me is every bit as essential as, the wear and tear in a game. Flip Saunders, the late Timberwolves coach, he used to say, are you going to tell me that 5 extra minutes on the floor when a guy is lathered up and loose and in the flow of things and running on adrenaline as much as anything is going to matter? If he's averaging 33 minutes or 38 minutes, as long as there are enough off days in between. Now, if you're playing, 4 games in 5 nights, all right, maybe there's a consideration there. But I think by and large, you build up endurance. Everything else that you do in life, certainly athletically, that you increase your stamina through, it tends to be a good thing, right? I mean, you don't prepare to run a marathon by lounging around. I think it's overstated. I think it's a too easy hook with Tom Thibodeau. It's been brought up in Chicago, it was brought up in Minnesota, and obviously now it's been brought up with the Knicks. But I think it's a bunch of hooey. I think that when you get into a playoff atmosphere, Teams for decades have shrunk their rotations to 7 or 8 guys at most, and your frontline players are playing 40 minutes. So I don't have a lot of patience for it. I think it's a cheap tactic.
Steve Aschburner, senior writer, NBA.com, ahead of tonight's game 1 of the Eastern Conference Finals between the Knicks and the Pacers. On the Pacers side of things, I almost feel like, Steve, we're here in Buffalo, and we're a market seeking its first championship in a major sport. I have a soft spot for a team like the Pacers, where not the biggest market, they're competitive an awful lot, and it feels like it would be great if they made it all the way and won. I'm thinking back to for anybody that's watched the NBA for a long time, it's hard not to draw back on the Reggie Miller Pacers and the Knicks back in the late 90s and early 2000s, and just kind of have this spot where, if it's Halliburton that takes over or whatever it is for the Pacers, I think they'd be a good story when this is all said and done.
Well, what I like about Indiana, a couple of things. One, their depth. I think they've really done a great job of roster building there. They don't necessarily have an all-NBA first-team player. Halliburton can bubble up and get that sort of attention, but I don't think that he certainly doesn't carry himself like a star, and generally doesn't get treated like one of the faces of the NBA that we hear so much about. So I think that this saying you get nowadays in the league about guys who are stars in their roles, I think that typifies the Indiana Pacers. They have the division of labor there is very clear cut, and there's some overlap, which is by design in terms of wings who can defend, with Mathurin and Neesmith and even Andrew Nembhard. But for the most part, guys know their roles. They know the pecking order of that team. It's fairly democratic. Everybody likes to play at a high pace. The way that they are able to put defensive pressure on, up to and including 94 feet, and then immediately shift into a fast break transition kind of an offense, that takes a deep roster. It takes high energy. And, they do it as well as or better than anybody else in the league. So I like Indiana a lot. I've been really impressed. And Carlisle, of course, he's got an NBA title under his belt, and he's won Coach of the Year a couple times. I think that he's a perfect coach for this team as well.
Steve, I want to bring back another point you mentioned a couple of minutes ago about how there's not really those super teams anymore. The Bosh, Wade, and LeBron James. There's not a ton of these big threes that remain anymore. And I'm curious on your thoughts, because I look at the Final Four in the West, and now in the East between the Knicks and Pacers, and out West with Oklahoma City and Minnesota. Is each team's kind of quote star is a ball handling guard, all of which can shoot. I'm just wondering now your opinion of the style that's going to maybe win in the NBA is having your best player, maybe outside of, Denver with Jokic. Obviously, he's an unbelievable talent and not a point guard. But these ball-dominant guards with shooters and sort of role players and deep benches, is that maybe what you're going to see as the sort of blueprint for NBA franchises that, and maybe does that bring in smaller franchises in smaller markets that maybe can't afford to have, these luxury tax rosters where you've just got tons of these, not necessarily star players, but expensive players?
Well, I don't know that I'm following you 100%. I mean, I think there's always been a dominant player, a guy who handles the ball a lot. It used to be LeBron for the teams he's been on. I mean, sometimes it's been a non-point guard. I think it's just sort of a coincidence. I mean, Anthony Edwards is a shooting guard. I don't know that I don't really see a pattern there. I think that, to me, it's the way that these guys came up organically within their teams. Anthony Edwards was the number one pick because Minnesota stunk, and they happened to nail the number one pick right that year. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, I mean, he sort of was a happy result of a Paul George trade that the Clippers gave him up. And I remember up until a couple of years ago, the thought was that Oklahoma City, they've got all the surrounding pieces. They've got the role players. They will eventually use some of those, trade assets, those draft picks that they have stockpiled, and then they'll bring in a star who'll be the straw that stirs the drink. Well, he emerged from within, and that accelerated the Thunder's timeline with SGA emerging as that guard. I mean, Brunson should have been re-signed by the Dallas Mavericks. The fact that they did not do that, it looks now like one of the major gaffes. I mean, they sort of gave up on other guys too. I mean, Porzingis was another guy, and could be that Doncic will be that guy too. And most of us would say that was a mistake to get rid of him. So, he ended up becoming this leader of a team and all NBA quality MVP, considered player in New York, sort of on his own and within that system. And then Halliburton in Indiana, the same thing. He was part of a pivotal trade. Two good players swapping teams. Domantas Sabonis, who's a double-double kind of machine, and continued that in Sacramento, and Tyrese Halliburton, who was sort of a young guy on the come. But again, I don't think people thought Halliburton would be the player that he is. So I don't see a real pattern there. I just think that it's refreshing to know that it wasn't simply a free agent purchase that bought somebody a ticket to the conference finals at this point.
Steve Aschburner, NBA.com senior writer. Steve, thanks very much for the time. Always a pleasure. Always glad to have you on. And enjoy this Eastern Conference Final Series.
Yeah, you too. You're welcome.
All right, Steve Aschburner, NBA.com senior writer.